Good evening. Welcome to our board meeting. And at this time, I will call the meeting to order and turn it over to Tessa.
Well, good evening. It's 6:02 p.m. We do have a quorum of the board present this evening. We have six of our 7 members present at the moment. Mr. Chandler will be joining us here shortly. And our first item of business this evening is the proof of notice, which was posted on multiple locations throughout the property last week on Friday, the 18th, and was also sent via email to the community. So our first item of business this evening is the approval of the prior meeting minutes from August 24th.
All right, do I have a motion to accept those minutes?
I move to accept the minutes. I second them.
Okay, we had the first and the second. Do we have any discussion? If no discussion, let's vote. All in favor of approving the minutes from the last meeting, signify by aye.
Aye.
Motion approved.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Before we get to new business, I just want to make a quick announcement for the folks that may have seen this. As you know, in regards to our Taylor Morrison settlement, they agreed to finish the second lift on the areas that they were repairing, and within 3 months of the agreement, which was 3 weeks ago, I'm pleased to announce that they started that project actually today. And if you ever went down Esplanade Boulevard, that street's now complete. They have more to go, but they're ahead of schedule, which I thought was fairly good. So there you go.
Great news. Great news. Wonderful. Okay, well then I believe, are ready to step into our new business. The first item this evening is funding approval for construction defect projects, and I believe Mr. Biller is going to take that topic.
Okay, thanks, Tessa. Everybody heard us last meeting talk about the overall deficiency list from Taylor Morrison and the approval last meeting of the settlement that we received for that. Tonight we want to talk just briefly. We're not going to reiterate all of the items and everything we did last meeting and talk about the money, but tonight is going to be an approval for us to move forward and start spending the money for all these individual projects. Since the last meeting, we've had an initial meeting with Icon Management on all the stakeholders on all of the individual projects. So each project now has a responsible person or a project manager from Icon assigned to it. That person knows the details of each of the projects, what we need to do to move forward, potential timeframes, and also the allotted budget item, the budget amount for each one of those items. So we've got a pretty good footing on where we're going with each of these. I'm going to run down the list just in detail for the people that are tuning in tonight that maybe didn't hear the list from the last meeting. One is the amenity center windows. We've got some fogging issues over there. They're on the list. The card room flooring at the amenity center. The acoustical issues at the culinary center. Golf course drainage issues. Now these are issues, this is drainage that's just for the golf course. We're not talking about individual home drainage here, just golf course drainage. And also the issues with some of our golf course bunkers, that's another line item. The redo and the correction of the pavers in front of the pro shop area for golf. Some of the pond bank erosion areas on the Sorrento street, but actually both sides of the street in those ponds. There's erosion issues around the backside of the houses, in between houses and hole number 15 green. That whole hillside there is going to be redone. We have some ongoing issues with the golf course irrigation system that will be corrected. We have some lighting issues. We have lighting at the back Benito gate, which is really dark at night, along with all of our mailbox areas around the site. The amenity center parking area, everybody knows that it's pretty dark at night. It needs to be lit up. The pickleball courts, the lighting there is really substandard, so that lighting is going to get upgraded. We had some refrigeration issues at the Culinary Center and Bahama Bar. Both of those will be taken care of. And the last item on our list is road under drain piping. So there'll be a pool of money set aside for when we need, if and when we need to add some additional under drain piping above and beyond what Taylor Morrison has already done in the community. So that's the listing of items. And I don't know if any of the other board members right now have any questions on any items or what we're doing with any of them.
On the first item, there was talk that it was going to be taken care of by warranties. And I know I just had a similar incident at my house. My house is 7 years old. This place is what, 5? Is it are those windows under warranty?
From what we can tell so far, and after Eric's and some of the infrastructure group's initial conversations with the company, yes, they're going to be under warranty. So that money we had allotted for that, we'll be able to use
Somewhere else.
on some of these other projects.
Okay.
Jim, on the backside of that question, let me make sure everybody understands. The money that we got from Taylor Morrison for this is for the deficiency list projects only. Am I saying that correctly, Chris? Yes, construction defects. So when the list was put together and the estimates were made, we tried to be as conservative as we could, not to cut ourselves short. With that said, you never know. I mean, when you get contractors out here to look at the scope, things could change. We've been fortunate on some of the items that we've got final costs on to date. We are actually under budget on those, but we may have some items that are over budget because we haven't completely quoted out the whole list yet. So monies that are available from one of these items can slide in to cover some overages on some of the other items.
Is there any flexibility on that? Will there be any flexibility on that list down the road? Or are we locked into only those items? From my understanding, we have based our negotiation amount on these list of items that we have. If we manage this list well, we manage the projects well, if the money remains, other items can come in. Otherwise, I believe today we're telling people what are the items on the list. So I got to look at the other way too. And what happens if this money we have is not sufficient to cover these projects? Okay? And what we communicated then is if this was not sufficient, we will look into the reserve funding as a possible option to finish any of them out. I don't think we have as a board kind of said, how will we handle any new items of construction deficiency if they come through? We probably have to go through our normal process and say prioritize that item versus everything else and say where do we find funding for it. That is what I would understand. Dick, unless you or Steve have a different view on that.
No, I don't have a different view on that. The list we have is the construction defect items that we've negotiated with Taylor Morrison, and this is the list we have to work on. What I would suggest as we're moving forward with any motion is that we cannot exceed any one of these estimates to go forward. And if there is going to be an estimate using our RFP program where we have a formalized program for the getting quotes, if any one item goes over the estimates that we have on our list, then I think we need to go back and have we have to vote on that item that exceeds that. As long as it's within those limits, we could, today's meeting and hopefully this vote will allow those projects to go forward. As far as adding any more, I'm not sure at the end of the day we can. I think this list is pretty solid. So I think we should follow what we've agreed to in this list because I think it's going to help the community quite a bit in all the items that we know that we consider and the negotiated is really construction defect.
Go ahead.
I have another question, and it has to do with an email that came out about the drainage where it was being looked into that the stewardship district may be able to fix the drainage for us. Because that's, well, I'm just going by what it was read in the declarations.
We actually, the infrastructure team contacted the stewardship district. We had a conversation with them. Their response on it is that it's just additional drainage that we have on site that was installed as part of the golf course, not for storm drainage from roadways or housing areas and things like that. That is not part of their system inside of our fence that they actually own and would manage and pay for. Now, obviously, we can challenge that and talk to our attorney, but that's the response we have at this point.
Dick, one of the questions that I had was you mentioned the pavers around the golf shop. That's going to remain part of the construction defects list?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Can I add on to that too? Have we looked at any other options other than just putting pavers down? Would there be something less expensive that might look just as nice? I'm just asking. You know, it just.
I can't say for certainty that there were other options looked at, Jim. We would have to talk to the ICON team that is put together that plan for us. So I don't want to answer for them. I don't think they looked at anything else, but I don't want to answer for them.
Coming back to the original subject, we kind of got off a little bit. We essentially got, I'm talking in round numbers, $1.3 million to fix these alleged construction defects, right? And we have this list of items that we agreed to. So we come down this list, and at the end, we've completed all the items on the list. And for this discussion, we have spent less than the 1.3. I thought we had a discussion at one time that money, if it were available, would sit in some kind of escrow account in case we found out that the road work was not sufficient. Now, we had that discussion. I don't know whether we voted on it or anything, but that was where we left it last I recall.
Part of that $1.29 million was a separate $500,000 allotment that will be set aside for the
So
roads.
part of that 1.3 is 500 for exactly what I'm talking about.
That's correct.
So coming back to the original question then, we have 1.3, take out the 500 for the roads. Now we're at 800,000, right? So we go through all this list and we spend less than 800. We have some amount of money. We should, as a board at that time, determine where we want to spend it and use those things. It wouldn't be necessarily alleged construction defects. So it could be improvements or anything else. Am I right with that assumption?
Bob, I think we got to be very careful. The agreement we signed, okay, clearly states that we signed it to fix construction defects. Agreements are agreements. If we want to violate an agreement, we can get a legal opinion and say what is the consequences of violating that agreement. And if the legal feedback says it's not anything major, you can do it, that's fine. But the agreement we signed as an association, the agreement clearly states that we'll use the funds for construction defects. Other than the 560,000 and odd, which was the deficit funding, we said, agreement clearly says we can apply that however we want at the discretion of the board. But rest of the amount of the 1.29 million approximately, it clearly states that we will apply it only for construction defect, to fixing construction defects.
Okay, thank you, Krish. Let me ask the question another way then. We have this 1.3 million, we complete the list, and we still have some money left over. What can we do with that money and stay in compliance with the agreement?
What we could do with the money is add it to the $500,000 that we have put back on in roads to give us some more cushion in regards to say something happens with the roads that we need that money.
Well, and not just the roads. There might be other construction defects that we're aware of or that come up, and we need a little bit of cushion. For example, one thing that's come up is the golf course irrigation system. They have it to a point of working again, but it might not last. So things like that, I think we could put the money aside and use it for future issues.
Also, Krish has put, I'll let Krish tell everyone where the money is right now. So that may help you.
Okay, the settlement amount of the 1.8 and odd million dollars, as we agreed at the last board meeting as we voted, roughly 1.29 million is for construction defects. It is sitting in a separate account that's called construction defect fund. That's where it sits. The rest of the 567, the amount roughly, sits in our operating accounts as part of the working capital that we have. Okay, so that is the background. So Dick, I have a couple of questions. I just want to understand, what are we planning to vote on today with this list? Just want to get real clarity on what are you asking us to vote for today so that the rest of us are quite clear.
I haven't made the motion yet. I have the motion here to make, but I was taking questions first. But what I want the board to vote on today, just in general, without making a motion yet, is to approve spending, is to approve ICON as project manager for each of these to move forward and start spending money and getting these projects done.
Then I have a lot of questions at that stage. Because the motion, if we are already asking for approval of funding, several of these project scopes are not defined. Several of them, some of them are defined, several of them are not defined in project scope. So we are voting on saying we're going to allow this spending without having a scope defined on the project. I don't think that's a proper due diligence approval. I have no problem saying these are the areas that will be worked, and as the project is defined, at least at some dollar amount. I don't want the board to be working on $10,000 or $15,000 projects, but some amount, it has to come and say the scope is defined, and this is the amount of funding that's going to take to complete, and here are the deliverables for that project. Otherwise, I think, in my view, these are the ones that have not been defined, and without the definition, I don't know how we can do our due diligence well enough to say we're approving all these things. That's just, a single person's view. I just want to be very clear on that. If rest of you all feel that that's enough definition for you, that's fine. But I'm not comfortable that they've been defined enough. I can take several examples in there, which is not worth spending the time on, but they have not been fully defined. My suggestion is, we say these is the list of items that will cover the construction defect fund. I have no problem in saying we should support that because that's the basis. But to approve and say these amounts are fixed right now, I think is premature from my perspective.
From my perspective, I believe that the definition on some of these, we've been through this for a long time. So I think the definition of what the construction defects are on each one of these projects have, in my opinion, have been defined. There's been an estimate of how much these will cost. I suggested that any of the estimates that come in has to go through the RFP process that's very formalized, and you have subject experts that will be reviewing that here around this table. And if it exceeds that, then we have to come up with a separate vote. This is just my idea. So this is a good process tonight we're going through. You heard what Krish, his opinion is. Now you just heard about mine.
If I may, I agree with you, Krish. I have a hard time spending other people's money without knowing exactly what I'm spending on it. And I am going to go back to the redoing of where the golf carts is. I absolutely have no problem with the list here. I have absolutely no problem with any of the people's names that are on this list. My only issue is when they're going out, are they looking at all options? Are they just looking at, we're going to do this? I mean, and I'm going to go back, like I said, to the area by the golf carts. We're going to rip all those pavers up that are already there, from what I understand. No, we're not ripping, we're going to fix that whole other area, though.
One of the options was to remove all of the pavers. The other was just to remove some of the landscaping and add new pavers to the existing area, which was much less expensive than tearing out all of the pavers. So there are a couple options. They also discussed what the cost would be to extend the cement that goes down to past the Bahama Bar. That's a much more costly option to do that. So there are a few different options there.
Which tells me something changed from the last time we discussed this. Because the last time we discussed this, it was going to be ripping everything out. That's what we had said at one of the meetings.
That is.
I have no problem.
What you just said is a correct statement.
Right. What I have no problem with us saying, go with this. What I would like to see is that there's maybe 3 board members that make sure that the quotes we're getting work. That they absolutely work for us. But I'm very leery on giving someone and saying, you know, here's $247,000 or whatever it is for the acoustic thing. I know we fixed that, but to sit here and say, here's $80,000 for the to address the worst 7 worst holes. Are we looking at all options? I just want to make sure we're looking at the quotes, that we're not just assuming things are going to happen the way we want them to.
Well, I'm not really sure, and I'll be very frank here. I'm not sure where everybody's been, but we've been negotiating on this list since the beginning of the year. It hasn't changed. There's been a few things that have come off, and there's been a few new things through discovery that have gone on. Every one of these items has been discussed in detail, where the quotes came from, who's involved with the project. There's an infrastructure person and a board member involved with every single line item on here. Nothing has gone by the wayside, and I agree with Chris's statement that there are a few items on here that are undefined yet. But what we've done, because we know a perfect example is the bunkers. We know that the bunker repair is going to be way more than $80,000. But what we've allotted through this is $80,000 to take care of the worst bunkers that we have right now. So Mickey is working on a plan to do just that, to spend this amount of money to take care of as many bunkers as he can, doing it properly. And I trust Mickey to tell me what is the best option. And that's all I can do. None of the board members are golf experts. We're certainly not bunker expert. But we've hired people that are. So at the end of the day, me as a board member, I trust these people to do the correct thing. That's just me.
Like I said, I don't distrust them. I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, no, and I get it, Jim. I get it. And there probably are, you know, there's 10 ways to skin a cat to get the same result. But all these have been discussed in detail at almost every meeting we've had. We've discussed them in detail with Taylor Morrison even on how we're even going to do some of these repairs. So there's nothing else I can say about it. I understand what Chris is saying. We just don't want a carte blanche, let them go out and start spending money without having things defined. But I think as part of the motion we make, it will be part of the motion that there's a control built in that before they spend any money on a quote or something that they define, that they bring it to the board and we make sure that we're all in agreement that this is the best way to go before we go forward. I mean, that can be part of the motion. I just don't want to continually have to wait for another board meeting to start moving forward on every one of these projects individually.
Dick, I think you said it right in that last statement, and I kind of, in other words, at the last board meeting, I believe, we approved, correct me if I'm wrong, just phase 1 of the acoustic issue, if you recall, because we weren't comfortable going to phase 2 or 3 or 4, however many. So it seems like we've gone from one extreme of doing one phase of one project to just saying, you're asking us as a board to approve $1.3 million, which you said, well, later on they'll come to us as a board and we'll decide whether to do it. Why wouldn't we do it then? In other words, take each project as standalone. We're going to have bunkers for 80,000. Somebody comes in and says, okay, it could be. I'll use Sandy as an example because she's a liaison for golf. I'm making a motion that we spend 80,000 to fix the bunkers, and here's what we propose to do, and then we vote on that. Instead of just, are you actually asking the board to approve 1.3 million tonight? That's where I'm confused.
I believe what we're considering is asking the board to approve this list, subject to the RFP program, with enough. Most of these things are above the $70,000 limit, which would require 3 quotes and a subject matter expert to review it before it's approved.
I understand now. So while we're approving tonight is the list, which I don't know anybody has an issue with the list. It's almost like a moot point. In other words, we have a list here that we all agree this stuff needs to be done. Until they get the RFP and get some firm numbers, we're not voting on it anyway as far as dollars are concerned tonight then. Am I right?
Well, what's going to happen is that a lot of these things will happen simultaneously. So there will be probably 9 projects going on at once.
But we're going to have to approve each and every one of the 9?
That's what we're going to talk about. I'm not sure that you.
Well, the motion is, I think, from what the
I haven't
approve
made
them
the
all.
motion yet. I'm waiting.
Yeah, this is a
We're
discussion.
in a
Haven't made a
discussion.
motion.
Just a suggestion, though. I mean, I don't believe we need to get the details. In other words, if you had made the motion last meeting to let's approve the acoustic improvement for the culinary center. We'll do phase 1. We'll evaluate it, and if it's right, we'll move on and on and on. That would have been sufficient to cover the whole thing. But at least it's a whole standalone project. Same thing with the bunkers. Same thing with any other project on the list. To at least come out and say to the board, we're asking you to vote tonight to spend X dollars to take care of irrigation on the golf course, and we'll keep you abreast and we'll do the RFPs. But, just to throw a big basket of money at it,
We're not throwing a big basket of money at it. There is a process involved.
So we're not voting on, so all we're voting on tonight is the list.
Is to allow them to go through the RFP process.
Oh, of course. No, I don't even think that takes a vote, though.
For the RFP process that we have right now to work well, what is the scope of the project needs to be defined up front. Because once the scope is defined, then you can get quotes. So who is making the decision on the scope of the project for each one of these items then?
That would be the project manager involved for the.
Steve, I think it needs to be broader than the project manager. The implications of some of this thing is a lot broader than the project manager with their knowledge of where we are. Technically, I agree with Dick. They have the technical knowledge to able to execute and do the right things. But what is the scope of the project? There needs to be some understanding before we get the RFPs, because once the RFPs come and then we determine the scope is either too narrow or too broad, we got to repeat the whole RFP process again.
I'm going to add too that there's the next one of the, a couple of these things that are over $200,000, 80,000. They're only waiting on 2 quotes. RFP process says 3. So if they can only get 2, they've got to say why they can only get 2 in the whole process.
Correct.
So
Which they are.
I'm just saying, and I agree. As Chris just said, what was the definition of what they had to do? What was in the RFP proposal? That's all.
I'd like to make a couple comments first before we go there. This list has been developed for quite some time. This is not new news. We've reviewed it. This was the basis for our negotiation going in before we met with Taylor Morrison to agree on a settlement. We've all had plenty of time to review the list. Some of the things that are being suggested is that we don't want to move forward with some of the projects. when we have all agreed that this is the list, these are the deficiencies that we have, and these were the estimates that were part of the list when we went to agree to the settlement, and we were able to negotiate additional funds. So I'm not sure what the question is now, other than the RFP process, which with board oversight, I think we have to help the project managers in making sure that we get the right information before moving forward. But to say we're going to put all these projects on hold and vote one by one, I don't think we'll get anything done.
Let me ask this question. We've got quotes coming in. Where are the RFPs? Where are the written RFPs? This is a list. It tells us what has to be done. This isn't an RFP.
They're coming into the respective icon point. Whoever has responsibility.
Do we have them? Are they a matter of record? We have a process we have to live by. Do we have the RFPs written for these things?
The answer is I understand what you're saying, Jim, and the answer is no. The written RFPs, I would assume that the ICON people haven't formally written RFPs for these. We sat down with them individually in a meeting with all the stakeholders and talked through every single project and what each stakeholder and each responsible person for that project was expected to do. With that, they went out and started talking to companies about that scope and what it was going to cost to perform that scope. So that's what we have.
Okay, so back to what I was saying. It appears that what we want to put the motion and vote on tonight is we're all agreeing that this list is the list we're going to work from. We're all agreeing to have ICON and/or the liaisons associated with them to move forward and get RFPs and get bids. And then when they get that, we'll come back and look at it and say, go. Is that where we're at tonight? That's my understanding as of right now. Is that correct or incorrect?
I don't even. As long as we're following the RFP, I don't think it has to come back to us. As long as we have the documentation as it's written in the RFP, move forward. They can move forward. But I just want to make sure that RFP is written because it's our process.
Correct. There's no question of that is the process. There's no question that the project descriptions have been written here for a long time. There's no question we've all discussed what the scopes are for almost all of these projects for the last 9 months.
That being the case, it seems to me the only thing we really need to do is just to prove that this is the list we're going to be working on. Everything else will fall into place just in the normal process of working on them.
We already approved the list.
That's right.
However, ICON has not gone forward to execute any of it because they don't think they have the authority to. They were told to stop one project until it was approved.
Got it.
If I may, and
So-
to that point, and I apologize because I was not involved in some of those discussions that have taken place specific to these project development and who's going to be the point person and who's going to run point on these. To Krish's point, I would say on some level I would agree that our team is in some of these areas is not going to have the experience necessary to write a scope or an RFP necessarily. So we need to consider that. In any situation like this, even though you have the funds, once in a normal process, if you were going out to bid on a project, if the rule here is if it's over 70,000, it requires 3 RFPs or 3 bids, we'll say. Once those bids came back, ultimately the board is responsible for choosing one of those 3. That is not something ICON can do for you. So.
Right.
I think maybe we're just mincing words. Maybe that's where we're trying to get. I guess I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. I don't think we're skipping the RFP process. I don't think, Icon is going to run point on this solely. And it will eventually, once the scope is developed, the bids are collected, will need to come back to the board for final approval to determine which vendor is going to be selected, because ultimately that needs to be your decision, not the management company's. But all of those things can work together simultaneously and be moving together forward all at the same time. But am I wrapping that up? Are we kind of all on that same understanding?
Yes, absolutely, Tessa. But that follows up to the question or the comment that Steve just made. Then what is it Icon needs from the board to go forward specifically? I'm not sure. Are you looking to, maybe not the board, but the board and the infrastructure group to prepare the scopes? Are you looking to the board and the infrastructure group to prepare the request for proposals?
It's probably a combination. It's
So
going to be
you're
a
looking for
combination of
that.
the Icon representative, your infrastructure point person, and an expert in the
In that area.
industry in that area.
Let me ask a third question. Is Icon also asking the board and or the infrastructure to help with getting the proposals out for bids and selecting potential vendors?
No, I think once the
So that's
scope
when
is
Icon will
developed,
take over.
absolutely. Once the scope is developed, we would have those conversations with other clubs and other communities that we manage, and we have vendor lists and companies that we've worked with, and we would reach. Now, of course, if the board or any of the infrastructure group members had a recommendation of a company they'd want us to include, by all means, we would want that to be shared with us. But absolutely, we wouldn't expect you to necessarily choose those vendors that we would go out to bid on. Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Now, again, I can't speak to what the conversations were about how some of this was developed. I apologize because I wasn't part of that, but that would be the normal process for going out to bid on any large project.
So if we're going to follow, I think we're in violent agreement, but we're talking on different directions. If we're going to follow our RFP process, it clearly states any item spent above $70,000, the RFPs, once the team has done it, has to come before the board, actually with the item, okay? And our RFP process says anything between 10 to 70,000, okay, the selected vendor needs to be brought before the board and say, here is the vendor we selected, and this is the work we are going to do. And I think when Icon states we don't have, because they're just following the process, we call it category A, category B, and category C. Category C is less than 10,000. So I think what we are asking, what the general is, if you're going to follow the RFP process, then the things will have to come, most of them, in front of the board. I don't know, I think, if you're going to follow that process, that's what the process says.
That's the process.
Yeah, so if that is the case, Steve, what are we voting on then, today?
We're not going to be voting on anything today then. However, I would say that that there will be multiple meetings quickly once the RFP process starts.
Absolutely. I think the way the communication is to Icon and the rest of the teams is there any place where we are stopping your progress, and what can we do as a board so that they can't stop their progress? We want them to go and complete the work. If they tell us, by any chance, we not meeting once a month or whatever it is, if it's stopping their progress, then we need to know that so that we can plan for it and maybe to have one more board meeting. That's what is necessary to approve it.
One question I have: each one of these on this list, these projects, does each one have an assigned project manager?
Yes.
Okay.
Here.
Yeah, it's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
So the project manager then has the responsibility to generate the scope of work. Am I right? That's normally how it would be done. Yeah.
In agreement with what the board thinks the scope should be.
Right, but he or she can generate a proposed scope of work, and then the board would say, yeah, that aligns with what we're thinking as well. So is that the step we're at right now?
That's correct. We've already established a general scope of work on all of these items. And so when we start the process, if the scope is increased or reduced, that we need to talk about it. But what we want, the process should start now.
Okay, so that is my takeaway to take back to the ICON team, since obviously the project managers that have been assigned are obviously not in this room. So I will make sure I take that back to our team and find out where we're at in the RFP status for each of these projects. And we need to clearly establish some sort of a timeline. So that needs to be our next
Yes,
step, it
we
looks
do.
like. Okay, sounds good. So I'll take that as an action item for the ICON team and get to the appropriate people to get them connected with whoever they need to be on the infrastructure group, the board, whoever that might be, to keep this moving forward. Now,
They have it.
okay. I just don't have an update for you of tonight where they're at, so we'll get that to you. It sounds like you don't know what the status is, so we'll get that. Okay? We did have a question on here, a comment about the process, just the RFP process in general from, it looks like Lisa Harris, and it said, the approved process states RFPs must be sent 3 months before next bid date and a minimum of 3 bids analyzed annually utilizing property manager
That's a
vendor.
That's for vendors.
Okay,
That's
so
for
the
vendor
question was,
contracts.
does that address projects such as these? And the answer, it sounds like, is no, that's for,
Well, we follow the process, but the 3 months part of it has to do with vendor contract. But if you take the vendor part out of it, the process is the same. It's just, it's not 3 months, it's whenever the scope is finalized, and then they go out and make an RFP.
got it. And then we have another question from a Jessica Christofferson that is asking, who employs the project managers? And it sounds like those are ICON
The project
employees.
managers are all ICON employees, and we already pay them.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So it sounds like we are not having a motion on this topic this evening. So are we ready to move on to the next item on the agenda?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So the next item, I will go ahead and turn that over to you, Sandy.
All right. So this is an item that recently came up, and it has to do with the repair and maintenance. As all of you know, we have a floating driving range, and so on that range, on the ponds, we have target greens, 2 that are 15 by 20, 1 that's 9 by 12, and 1 that is a 10-foot circle target green. These have not been maintained, and no work has been done on them in quite some time, and so they're really deteriorating. So we have an estimate here from, not an estimate, but a quote from the company that specializes in this, Aqua Greens, and what needs to be done is they need to remove the greens from the pond, inspect the flotation and aluminum frames, replace skirting on the front half of all the greens, apply 2 new coats of paint, and then on the tops of them, they'll install new long-life UV-resistant golf turf, new stainless steel anti-bird wire to keep the birds off the targets, new flags, and complete replacement of the anchor systems with heavy-duty hardware. And then they'll lay out the range with laser sight and re-anchor all of the targets. And then that also includes removal. We had a ball containment system installed by this same company, and it was to protect the floating range balls from going into the weeds, which did not work. So we lost thousands of balls into the weeds. And so they've agreed to remove that and refund the cost of the materials for that for $1,600. So the quote to do this maintenance is about $15,000, $14,800 to be exact. And then we also will need, well, that's going to be a separate topic, but that's just the quote to get the maintenance done on the targets.
I have a question. Didn't we just replace all those things over a year ago?
If we did, I'm not aware of that, Steve.
2 years ago. Is it the same company that's giving us a quote now?
I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, that's. I think we have to investigate who gave us, who did the work 2 years ago.
For a little bit of clarification, Steve is right. About 2 or 3 years ago, the company that originally put them in did not use waterproofing wood. And they were falling apart, deteriorating really bad. And someone did come in and repair them all about 2 to 3 years ago.
Someone made them aluminum. I don't know when that happened, but the frames are aluminum frames.
From my perspective, I don't have a problem with this. Just make sure that maybe it's not the same people that rebuilt them 2 years ago. That's all. And I don't know.
I think that's a good point. If they were rebuilt, we got to verify that we have learned something out of that process not to do it. But from my understanding, it's critical to get them done as quickly as possible because the anchors that are holding them are deteriorating totally. I don't know whether they were replaced last time or not. I do not know that. If the anchors are getting deteriorated, it means these things are moving. And you don't want them to float away to one side. That's a bigger issue. And when I did ask Aaron, he tells me that this is something that should have been done every kind of 5 years. That is kind of what I call a deferred maintenance, being done every 5 years to fix these things and not wait till the condition gets to here. We should find that, but is that going to prevent us from doing the work? Maybe we got to go to a different vendor. That's probably an option. But the question is, should we get the work done or not? Is what I'm going to ask, with the board members really.
Yeah, and according to Aaron, he's not been able to locate any documentation of any work that's been done.
I agree. There's nothing that I've seen in the financial side that I could put my finger either on reserve spending or operation spending on this specific item. If they did spend it, it's mingled with a lot of other stuff that hasn't been identified. Okay.
Well, it was done while Taylor Morrison was in charge in deficit spending, and I don't know how they accounted for it. So, you got a motion?
I have a motion.
Question. Wait a minute.
Yes.
Would this be out of operations, or do we have this in the reserve?
Great question, Alan. Actually, this is available in the reserves. And again, I just got to be very open. In the reserves, we call it a replacement, actually replacing all the floating Ts. And when I talked to Aaron, he just shook his head. He says, what do you mean replacement? These are kind of lifelong things as long as you maintain them. These are steel plates and aluminum stuff. They don't, you don't need to replace them for every 20 years. So there's a total misunderstanding of what this whole thing is. But we do have enough money, because in the reserves right now for these things, it's 20-year life with $75,000 is what the estimate is. I don't think this is anywhere close to any of that. Okay. At least there's some money in the reserves. Yes, please.
All right, do we have a motion?
Yes, so I'd like to make a motion that we approve the maintenance and repair of the floating targets in the amount of $15,000.
Discussion? I have some. I would recommend reconsideration of the motion and make sure that you're motioning to utilize reserve funds, and also that a validation that the firm being used, if we're able to find whoever did it the first time, is not used. You may not be able to find it.
I would support the amended motion or second it if that's the amended motion.
I suggested an amended motion if.
I accept your amended motion.
All right. Well, let's.
I second it then.
If you want to restate the motion.
I'm not going to restate it. I just suggested what you should maybe change it to.
Sandy, let me see if I can rephrase the motion for you. You're requesting $15,000 of spending from the reserve funds to do deferred maintenance. I would use the word exactly, to do deferred maintenance on the floating ranges under the condition that if we can find who is the vendor that repaired it last time, is not the same vendor that's going to repair it this time. Okay? Did we capture that, please? Thank you.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? With no discussion, let's vote. Those in favor of the motion signifies aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next on the agenda, please.
The next item on the agenda is the funding approval for landscape projects, so we'll turn that over to Alan.
Good evening. So we're faced with a problem in the community that we have a lot of homes that have sod that's not performing. So the landscape group, working with Eric, brought in an agronomist consultant, and they came up with a plan to try to cure these dying sod lawns. So they picked 50 homes. The criteria was basically these homes had to be 4 years old or more, and they all suffered from compacted thatch. And the suggested recommendation to cure it was to aerate it, use a special fertilizer, and hopefully within a few weeks, they'll be able to see whether this method works or not. If it works, the plan is to then roll it out to the whole community next year. So the cost for the program was, the aeration was $2,250, and the special fertilizer was $5,200, which also include some fertilizer for the common areas, not just the homes. So I used my $5,000 monthly authority, since this project was going to last over 2 months, to approve it. So I guess I'm asking for board approval of what I did. So I make a motion that we proceed with a test, and if it's successful, that we roll it out next year.
Questions? So, assuming it's successful, that this will, whatever it's going to be costing next year, if success, for the rest of the community, will be considered in next year's
In next year's
process.
budget.
Okay.
Questions?
Any questions?
So how did we determine the 50 homes that we were going to test this on?
The landscape group with Eric selected a representative of 50 homes. They had to meet that criteria of over 4 years old, and they picked 50.
So if this is successful, the plan is to aerate all of the homes throughout the
Yes.
community that have these issues? all
I
homes?
believe not just the ones with the issues, but all homes. No, it's something that would be needed for everyone.
So what's the total cost of that?
That would run $85 a home, $83,000 for next year.
In that regard, that's just an estimate at this time, and you may have situations, if this is successful, to check with our ICON friends to see if we can do any of this ourselves. Maybe
Yes.
purchase the equipment and then lower the cost. If
Absolutely.
it's successful, to look for different opportunities before we discuss it as to what we really need to put in the budget.
In the budget, yes. This is just, if we use the outside vendor that's doing the test, it would be $83,000. If we have the manpower to do it ourselves and the ability, buying an aerator or two is not very expensive, so it's doable. The question is the manpower, and that's something we have to take up with Eric and the ICON group.
Okay.
I just want a little clarification that I'm going to say is that Alan and I had a get together and we talked about different things. And just to let people know, a 36-inch tow aerator goes for $2,700. A 42-inch one goes for $3,000, and they're just towed behind some sort of vehicle, whatever. So that could help, and at the same time, they probably could be used on the golf course if we need it. It could become part of that equipment. Then we also talked about when we're getting to the mulching section, they were going to look at having someone come in and maybe if it's less expensive, have them blowing mulch in down the road. Because everything I've read on blowing mulch, it ends up being more cost effective than having someone out there throwing bags down and just spreading it as they see fit. The blowing will happen.
Jim, just at this point, we're not dealing with
I
mulch.
understand, but I just want to say some of the things so they know
Okay.
what's going. And the only problem I have, and we talked about it, is the 50 homes. There are some homes in there that have been picked that because of the people being on committees or whatever,
Removed.
they
They were
I have a
removed.
problem with them being on that list of 50.
They're not. They've been removed. Problem cured.
So at this
Thank you.
point, if I may, since this is really done within your authority, I'm not sure we need to have a motion on this particular, in regards to the testing. I think, from what I understand, that the criteria was objective. The homes that were selected were objective. We are very hopeful that this test with the fertilizer works, because landscape here is always an issue, and if ICON, in the collaboration with as many people as they've been talking with and good residents and our members within the community, if it works, then it's something we need to do next year for the entire community. So
So, go ahead, Chris. So what's the total impact to the budget for this year?
For this year, it was under $10,000. $7,500.
Okay.
Alan, just get a clarifying question. You said the 20 to 50 is nice for the 50 tested homes, and the 5,200 is for the fertilizer. Correct. You said it's for homes and common areas. I believe some of that fertilizer was used on common area. If that is the case, is the fertilizer effective in the common areas without doing aeration? If you're saying, there's no costs in here for aeration of the common areas, so if the fertilizer is effective in the common areas without aeration, why is it not effective in the homes without aeration?
No.
Or are we missing in this estimate aeration for the common areas?
I believe, Krish, that Eric reported to us that the common area aeration was done, but that it was funded through common area grounds expenses within
How
the budget.
much? Because there's no budget for it.
I don't know what I believe. But Eric did report to Alan and I this morning that the common areas were aerated.
So it's more than this amount is all I'm trying to bring out. It's not just the 20 to 50 and 50 to 100. There's an aeration amount for the common areas that was approved and
Yes, but that was done under the regular landscaping budget.
it was already done then,
Yes.
not something that you initiated.
No. That was done. Eric did that as part of his general groundkeeping.
What was the cost?
I don't know that.
We'll find that out, and I'll have Eric circle back with you on that.
I think I might have it. Go ahead.
So with that, I would just ask the board members, do we need to vote on this matter that at least this part of the experiment that's been approved by Alan utilizing his authority, does it need to be voted on?
I think we need to know the total cost, if it's in excess of ICON's delegation authority or if it's in excess of.
Well, I agree, we need to know what the total cost is. I think we need a control point going forward, Tessa, that anything that occurs, there should be a control point and to say where we are in that process to then make a determination if it needs to go to the board. We don't want to stop normal operations and we don't want to get into the weeds every day, but we do need a control point sometimes, especially on things that are experimental, that are not in the budget.
Agreed. And it's possible that he spoke with Bobby about that, and I'm just not aware of his mind out.
Okay.
Okay, the number I have, I'm sorry, never mind. The number I have for common areas, Alan is telling me it's probably for next year. I don't know what this year is. The only quote that Eric shared with me says it's about $12,600 for the common areas, okay, to do the aeration.
I don't know if that's this year or next year. I was under the impression that that was for next year.
I think at this point, because there's some questions about this, let's defer this to the next meeting till we have enough information for us to make a determination if we need to approve something or at least get a control point so we all are comfortable with the process. But I applaud the effort in regards to trying to determine other ways to improve our sod throughout the community.
Thank you. Alan, just one question so it's clear. The money you're spending right now within your authority to do this testing, that's going to give you the information you need to take this next step, and you're waiting for the results of that to confirm that that's the right way to go. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so shouldn't we wait for the results, and then you're going to come back and say the results were successful? Now I'm proposing we spend all this money for next year?
Well, how we do it next year, I guess,
You
like
want to
Jim
make sure it's
said,
in the budget. Is that why you're bringing it up now, to make sure it gets into the budget for next year?
just the fact that we
Yeah.
did the test to see if it's a solution to a big problem in the neighborhood. If it is, then we can figure out the best way to put it into the budget for next year.
But we got to get. I think your point is we got to, even though don't have the results yet, if they are successful, we got to make sure we got the money in the budget to do it.
Yes.
I get it.
And,
I get
and depending on the timing of the budget restraints,
Yep.
worst case, we would put this amount into the budget, and then if we don't use it, all the better.
Bingo.
Yeah. My suggestion, though, is that we know what the total cost is that's being spent. It's already been spent on the common areas. We don't have that figure. So what's already been spent this year in this year's budget?
Alan, when do you think the results would be?
Personally,
Well,
I hope it's a revival of the sod.
No. When do you think
Oh.
it'll occur? I know what your hopeful results would be. I'm just asking, when do you think it'll be?
They said by the end of October, because that's the end of the growing season. So
we,
the next,
so we need to investigate what it would be cost-wise, or if there's an opportunity to do it in-house, and what that would be to impact, because the budget will be done by the end of October.
right.
Gotcha.
That-
Okay.
That's a timing issue.
Got it. Anything else? Anybody else has anything on this? Hope it's successful. All right. Tessa.
All right. The next item on our agenda this evening is the investment of all association funds. Krish, I believe you're taking that, and we should have a PowerPoint for this.
Thank you so much, Tessa. This is a good one to talk about. Okay, actually, it's a very positive thing for the association. We're talking about, we now start to have funds in the bank accounts. Is there a higher value we can achieve than just the bank savings rate or bank's checking rate that we get on these funds? So we have done this for reserves under Taylor Morrison's board. We got approval from them. So the reserves are invested at stage about a year and a half ago, roughly. I'm now trying to propose to the board where are funds available and what are the opportunities to invest and to make a little bit more money that could be utilized without significant effort. So basically what I'm going to talk about first, tell you where the source of funds are available for investment so that you have an understanding what is the scope of this request. First is reserve funds. Roughly right now, more than $1 million are available for long-term investing, actually, because we're building the reserves, so the more than 1 million is available for long-term, and it'll increase by about 250,000 each year, roughly. You pay more than 250, but I'm saying you'll spend some money out of the assessments we collect. So 250 will be available each year. Suggestion is that 250,000 be for short term and $1 million, roughly over $1 million for long term. Those are the funds available in reserves. Okay, the construction defect fund, we just heard us talk about it before. If $500,000 of that is towards the roads, there's a possibility that we could invest that $500,000 for the longer term or even shorter term, depending on how we want to do. And same thing, if all the projects have not been approved, you might have about 250,000 for investing for shorter term. And lastly, operating funds. Since we have now a good balance in the operating funds, we collect the assessments, all the assessments in the beginning of the quarter, and we only spend, and that's about roughly $1.5 million. And we only spent in that first month $500,000 out of the assessments. So we have from the operating funds for a short-term investment of $500,000 for 2 months and $500,000 for a month if you can find right opportunities. So these are the funds available. So if you add up, that's a good chunk of money if you can properly invest to make some interest than just getting a savings interest out in the bank accounts. Okay. So the proposal to you is, first of all, before I go, where are the location of the funds? The operating funds are in one account at Truist, which is called BB&T Bank previously. It's now called Truist. That's where they are. That's our banking partner right now. The reserve funds are in the following bank accounts. The assessment collected every month or quarterly goes to Truist. The money market is in the BMO Harris Bank for reserves, and the bank CDs are at BMO Harris Bank. So with the transition, now we have 2 different places where the reserve funds are located. And the construction defect funds are in an account at Truist. So the only thing that's not with Truist is some of the reserve funds, or the big portion of the reserve funds. What's the proposal to the board? First proposal is consolidate all funds at Truist as a single banking relationship, because ICON does it, and we've been getting some great service from them in this process. And that's which we went to the PPP loan process too. So one banking relationship, and that's what we want to do. So that means we're going to consolidate it. Only when the CDs in the reserves mature at BMO Harris, we will move them, and we'll wait until they mature. And BB&T has an investment arm called Scott and Stringfellow, which is part of BB&T, and they help. We're going to seek them to help develop a strategy and options to invest the funds and to capture more value. Before any investments are made, it's going to be brought forth before the board with an updated investment policy, so you all approve the policy. And our investment policy generally is going to be, philosophy is generally going to be, you want to preserve the principal at all costs, and you want to get a higher rate of interest than a bank savings rate. Okay? Not a thing, but it gets you better rate, but you want to preserve the principal, so that's the basic thing. Jim Martin, who is one of the homeowners, he has a significant banking experience in his background. He was part of the finance committee, or finance group, So he's be working with the treasurer, me in this case, to provide quarterly reviews to the board, actually, on where they're invested and what's the performance been, and propose every quarter any future proposed actions, actually, if you wanted to do. So a systematic process of investing. So really, the request to the board is proposing that we consolidate all the funds into one bank, which is in this case Truist, and allow us to work with BB&T, Scott and Stringfellow to develop a strategy of where we want to invest and bring it back before the board before any actions are taken.
Does anybody have any discussion before we make a motion will be made?
Quick question. The second thing says BB&T, Scott and Stringfellow. Is that the same as Truist? I thought you just said Truist took over.
I'm sorry, they still go by the name of BB&T, Scott and Stringfellow now. Even the bank changed its name to Truist. They have not changed that formally into Truist, Scott and Stringfellow. Don't ask me when that's going to happen. I don't know.
Good stuff. Very good. No, I guess I'll accept the motion.
Okay, did I second it?
No, you have to make it.
I haven't made it.
Oh, you made it?
I made it.
All right.
Second.
Yes.
Okay, the motion is asking board approval to consolidate all funds at Truist. Second part of the motion is allow us to work with BB&T, Scott and Stringfellow in developing a strategy and options on where these things could be invested. Once that is done, we'll come back before the board before any actual investments take place, get their approval at that stage. So the motion is just to do those two things. Consolidate funds at one bank and allow us to work with Scott and Stringfellow to develop a strategy and options.
I second the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? If none, then let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thanks, Krish. Thank you. All right.
I think everybody is aware at this point that my house was up for sale. It has sold, and by the rules of the board of directors and Statute 720, I have to officially turn in my resignation at a board meeting. So I am officially doing that tonight. I'm going to make it effective next Friday, October 2nd. And according to Robert's Rules of Order, I'm requesting to be excused from my duty from the board at that time. I just want to take a couple of seconds to really thank everybody that has worked with me over the past year and a half. I was on the initial infrastructure group with a fine group of gentlemen from the community, the operational transition group also last year. Really a good bunch of focused people that wanted to do nothing but try to improve this community, and I think they had a very large hand in doing that into the transition this year to the board. I also feel really good leaving at this point in time with everything that the board's accomplished year to date. You know, it's been almost 9 months, and that seems like a long time, but it's gone by really quickly. And for us to have accomplished what we have this year, I think, and where the club is at right now financially with COVID and everything else that's hit this year, I think everybody should feel really good about it. I know I do. Although I'm leaving, I want to continue to maintain all my friendships here. Made a lot of really, really nice friendships here, and I'll only be about 30 minutes up the road, so hopefully every now and then you'll still see me on this golf course, because I'd love to come back down here and play periodically. If there's anything I can do to assist my replacement on the board in the transition long after my departure date, I'd be more than happy to do. I've got a lot of background information and knowledge of everything that we did, and I'll try to put all my files in a organized manner and get them to somebody that's replacing me. But that's really about it. So with that, I've sent my resignation letter to Steve electronically. I'll also send it to you, Tessa. I gave you a paper copy earlier, but it's been changed. So with that, I appreciate it, and I wish you all well. Thank you.
Before we get to the expansion of this particular topic, just from a personal standpoint, I think Dick Biller and Tina Biller are wonderful people. They're examples of people who have a passion for this community. Selflessness is really the really good way to describe Dick and Tina, and what Dick has done with the infrastructure group as well as the board. You just don't understand the countless hours that he has put in. We're going to miss them, and we're going to miss Tina. They're great people. They're great friends. But they're on to a new adventure, and we got to embrace that, and it's going to be a wonderful thing for them. He's only 30 minutes away, so he still has a lot of knowledge that we could give. I still have his cell phone number. Plus, I'm Italian. I could find him if I had to. So I just wish him well. I think on behalf of the board, I think we all said the same thing for him. And now we need to move on in regards to some of the technical things that occur when a board member resigns, and so we'll move with that, and I'll turn that over to Jim.
I just want to add, as probably the person that's lived here the longest, along with Steve and Bob, I've seen everything Taylor Morrison didn't do, and have been involved from the beginning. And we may not have always agreed, but you and your team, as far as I'm concerned, saved our bacon in a lot of different ways. If this was a Massachusetts meeting, I would have said something else. But I just want to say, when you buy the boat and COVID's over, there's 6 people here that wouldn't mind taking a ride.
So with that, there's a proposed director replacement policy that we need to discuss. Either you or Tessa want to take that, and we'll talk about it and see where we go.
Okay, this is a HOA director replacement policy. And I won't get into all of it except to say that this policy was written not just for this board. It was written in the sense that any board anywhere down the line can make their choice to do what is right for that board at that time in the future. It is just the way it's set up. There are certain portions of this that a board must do. So getting into it, first of all, the board is not required to refer back to the last election for the replacement of a director, except if it's within the first 3 months of that election. So in other words, if Dick had left us in March, we would have went back to the original election. And I hate to put it this way, but the first loser from the golf group would have been appointed. That's the way it works. The second thing is that if that person declined to take the job, then there'd be a special election. The other thing is, regardless of the time left on the term of the director's position open, except as noted in number 2, the board shall have the right to enact any of the following on a majority vote of the board. They could replace the open position within 30 days for the balance of the term from a list of volunteers of the same membership as the resigning director. Dick is resigning. He's from the club side. The volunteers will come from the club side.
No, he's from the.
I mean, golf side, forgive me. Golf side, golf. To not replace the open director position if less than 3 months remain on the term of the resigning director. So if Dick resigned next October, the board would not have to replace him because it's within 3 months. And we could also hold a special election for the open director's position for the balance of the term. The other thing is, if any director is recalled per Florida Statute 720, we would follow those rules to do the replacement of it. And that is basically what this document is about.
Do we have any discussion about the document? You all have a copy of it. Is there any revisions or discussion about the document before we move forward? And then we have to talk about what we're going to do.
I have. Jim, can you share where the requirement comes that we have to do something in 30 days?
In 30 days, that is something I put in within 30 days.
Okay.
There is no specific requirement. I added in the 30 days because it's got to be done relatively quickly.
I understand that. I'm just wanted to make
Yes.
sure that the 30 days that you're asking is not a requirement.
No,
from
it
any
is not a
statute
requirement. It
or
is something
anything. So we can add.
we can
whatever
make
we-
it 45 days,
Okay.
whatever.
Thank you. That's one question that I had. I
Yes.
just want to get clarity on that, please. Thank you.
No questions, Jim.
No.
Just a comment, and I'm sure we'll all be sharing our personal opinions about this document here shortly, so I'll just go first. The board was set up like it was as a balanced board between club members and golf members with one at-large. It's meant to be that way. This is a very big community with a lot of moving parts and pieces on a daily basis. We never know what may come to the board that we may have to vote on. I don't think we should ever leave the board in an unbalanced position for very long if we don't have to. That's my only comment. Thanks.
Which is why I put in the 30 days.
Any other discussion in regards to the document besides the 30-day comment and suggestions on should we have a different date or is we okay with 30 days?
Maybe, Jim, a question on that. So let's use Dick as an example. He's resigning. Do we have 30 days? Let's say we're going to have an election to replace him. Is it 30 days to actually replace him or 30 days to get the election going? Because it takes a lot of...
That was going to be my recommendation, actually, that it should maybe state 30, start the election process within.
Yeah, because, 30 days is tough.
Tessa, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. That was going to be my recommendation as well, as opposed to having it state hold the election within 30 days, but rather state that it start the election process within 30 days, because you can't accomplish the election in 30 days because of the way the election process works here with secret balloting. So
given what you know about the election process, if we don't start it for 30 days, how much longer will the board seat remain unfilled before the election process is completed?
I can answer that. We're going to talk about this a little later, but the election for this year, there's two positions that their terms expire. So what ICON will be doing probably in the next 10 days, or at least 1st of October, we'll be sending out a call for candidates. And at that time, those of us, or those of you who would like to nominate yourself to be on the board, please do so. We encourage that. And I'm sure there'll be a resume requirement. Then from there, probably sometime in November, there will be a meet the candidate for the community to be able to ask questions and to the candidates. And then early December, for those of you who have been here at least a year, we had a electronic election process that was very successful, and we'll probably follow the same thing. So going around the barn quickly, that means the election will be held within the first week or 10 days of December, so that's at least 2 months away. which creates a conundrum today because Dick has submitted his resignation as of October the 2nd, and there's several board meetings, including the budget meeting, that will have to be done between now and October 26th. So suggestions before we move forward.
Let me ask a question. If Dick were resigning not October 2nd, but let's say it was September 2nd or August 2nd for this example, would we then hold a special election? How would we do that?
We have three options. We could have a special election. We do nothing until election comes up, or we could appoint someone for the remaining balance of the term. Dick's term doesn't expire until 12/31/2021.
But one of the three options you just mentioned, do nothing until the normal election, contradicts what Jim has in there that says we have to do something within 30 days.
Jim put 30 days in the document.
Right. I see the problem. I get it now.
I put 30 days in because that's what I thought would work. And, you know, this whole, and by the way, we can work, like Chris said, to what's in 720 now and make this effective for the future.
I understand that.
Okay, I don't know if everybody else understood that. Would you like to? Oh, go ahead. Well, it basically says we can either elect someone or appoint someone. But this one has some restrictions on the front end and the back end. So you wouldn't have to do anything 3 months before an election, and you would go back because it seemed only fair that if someone left in the first month for medical reasons, whatever, that you would go back to the election and stuff like that. So it kept 720 in it, but we did something on the front end and the back end.
We have a couple of questions here, but before I get to those, I just wanted to state that yes, Florida Statute 720 gives the board the option to appoint a person to fill that vacant role on the board, and you're not required to go through the process and expense of doing an election. That is probably more the norm in most documents. It's very unusual to have a set of documents like yours that are actually silent on this matter. I would say that in most circumstances, in associations that I've managed in Florida, typically the appointment of a vacancy is how it is handled by the board. But again, to Jim's point, you have the option. You can appoint, you can do nothing right now, or you can hold a special election. A special election at this juncture with the amount of time that it takes to do an election, of course, doesn't make sense.
So
Because of the time and because you're right on the heels of your next election anyways, right?
So Tessa, we have the option to appoint someone for the remainder of the year until we.
Balance of the term. The balance of the term. So whoever the board appointed would serve the balance of Mr. Biller's term, which would
But
be
I
December.
thought based on some of the email exchanges that we also had the opportunity to appoint someone for the balance of the year.
No, I believe that statute.
Sandy, I clarify that the 720 is very clear, saying that if you're going to appoint somebody, or if you're going to hold a special election, it is for the balance
Of the term. Okay. Thanks, Krish.
So before we proceed, Nancy Schneider stated, why can't you appoint someone? Simply the answer is you can.
We can.
And Brad Klink stated, agreed, appointing someone keeps the balance that was intended. And he also states, why not appoint the person who finished closest to being elected in the last election? Certainly an option, but not a requirement. The board certainly could choose to do that. And then Karen Eckert stated, does replacement director also assume the officer position left vacant by the resigning director?
That's an open question. I don't have an answer for the officer position. That doesn't clarify. We could do what we want with that.
I believe they're correct as well.
Let me ask a question. why would we not adopt exactly what's in 720, and we or any future boards can do what Jim is proposing or not? In other words, I think from 720 you have all the flexibility where you kind of tie it in tighter. Right. Am I right? Am I right there?
Right. I kept 720, the two items in 720, and I just did something on this side.
Well, can't we as a board do something on this side or this side, or a future board anyway, without it having it ready?
No. Under 720 right now, we can only do elect or appoint.
So that's all we want.
So with 720, if I can restate, it gives the board a lot more flexibility because the language says you either appoint or have an election.
Correct.
It doesn't say when, doesn't say how.
Correct.
It just says,
It would follow your normal election procedures.
all right. So the question at hand that complicates things is that the election is going to be held in December. The position will be open October 2nd or 3rd. And are we comfortable to have a unbalanced board for 2 months with what we have to deal with in regards to budgetary items that are going to be coming up that have a substantial impact on 2021?
And we do have a couple of other questions. Frank Kessman stated, in order to maintain a balance for the budget process, why not appoint the next person from the last election? And Melody Friedbach stated, if you appoint, must it be a golf member?
Yes, it must be a golf member. And as far as going back to the last election, since that was last December, if we decide to appoint someone, we have to see if that person would like to serve on this wonderful board.
Correct.
Because sometimes people change their mind.
Correct.
To answer your question, yes, we could stay with 720. I just felt when I wrote this, it gave us other options of what to do in the beginning and at the end.
Don't we have those options anyway?
Right, no, but the thing is, the options are to elect or select from volunteers. It doesn't say we have to go back to the last election within the first 3 months. We could take,
We could choose that. We could choose that as a board.
if they volunteer.
Yeah.
We could, right. We could.
We could also appoint or identify a person we're looking to appoint and ask that person if they would like to serve.
From a list of volunteers.
From a list of what?
Volunteers.
720 does say it's volunteers, right?
Obviously have to be volunteers.
Okay.
Yes.
We do have another question here from Melody Friedbach that states, when will the 2021 budget be approved by the board? And I believe our tentative date at this time is October 26th.
That's correct.
So we are at a point where
We're at a point that either we accept the a little bit more restrictive replacement policy that was recommended by Jim. Thank you for your work on that. Or we accept just a flat or the standard 720, either select or elect, with a lot of flexibility apparently, because it doesn't say anything other than select or elect. Is that what we have at hand right now?
Yes.
Okay. What do you want to do? No, you can't.
You need a microphone.
I will make a motion that we select or elect per Florida statute 720.
Do we have a second?
No, per 720. Elect or select, as it says in the 720. You can do either or. Yes.
your motion is to appoint.
No. My motion is to follow statute 720, and I wish I could remember the number, but matter of fact,
I have it in the
right,
email.
Chris have it, whatever. But within 720, my motion is to accept 720 as it is written, that the board can either elect a replacement or select a replacement
For the entire term.
for the entire term.
All right, do I have a second? Do we need to restate the motion?
Yes.
Probably should. Go right
Yes.
ahead. No.
No. I made a motion that we will follow Florida Statute 720, which basically says we can either select someone from a list of volunteers or elect someone. That's my motion. It's been seconded.
All right, is there any discussion? If there's no further discussion, let's vote. Those in favor of the motion signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll abstain.
Motion passes. So now we would have to, in light of the circumstance of Dick's retirement, I'll call it retirement. The board will have to make a determination. I'm not sure we're ready to do it tonight. Maybe we need some further discussion as to how we move forward in light of the fact that we're 2 months out from an election and we have significant board matters in regards to next year's budget that comes upon prior to the election. So we'll have to see what we want to do in regards to appoint or elect. I'm not sure we could hold a special election within 20 minutes to be able to have an election of this position. My personal opinion, and I'll state it, is that appointing someone from the board for this board position that are volunteers and are willing to accept the role is fine. However, with a position that has at least another year to go, it's my personal opinion that position would be better served as an electable position for the people to decide. Now, it's just a personal opinion. I have to do what's the best for the community, and under the circumstances, not sure exactly how we're going to go, but that's my personal opinion. I know that would take us past the vote for the budget, and it would be an uneven balance in regards to this board. So I understand the circumstance, but I just want to, for the record, let everyone know what my personal position is.
So I think based on all that we have on our plates and given the timing of Dick's resignation, when we're in this critical period and a lot of things to get done between now and the end of the year, I don't know that we can wait and leave this unbalanced. My position before would be to wait for the election since it's coming up in a couple months. But given the circumstances that we're now faced with, I would rather appoint.
I think we've been a very cohesive board working very well together. I have no reason to believe why that would change. And I don't think appointing someone with so little time left, the urgency seems to be the budget.
Yes.
And I don't know that anybody would be able to be selected, come on board, and be up to speed to really have enough knowledge to add that much value at this point in time. So I would rather wait for the election since it's so close anyway.
I just want to, I kind of agree with what Alan's saying. In other words, if we could wait for the election, and what Steve is saying as well, let the people choose and not us. The only issue we seem to have is, okay, a budget for 2021 is a big deal. It would only be a big deal if we were very unusual circumstances, split 3 and 3. Okay, then it would become an issue. It's highly unlikely that would occur, but nonetheless it could. And is there a way that we could say, okay, let's wait until the election, but if by chance we find ourselves in this very unusual situation where it's 3 and 3, that we can find a way to get ourselves out of that issue, and then we could wait for the election, which truly does make more sense at this point.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Jim.
I'm sorry.
Just
Ladies
one final
first.
point. Thank you. So there's a lot also in addition to the budget that Dick has been managing on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of oversight with infrastructure and food and beverage, just in managing everything that he's been managing from a workload perspective. That's why I don't think it's prudent for us to wait.
I was going to say I agree with everything everybody said, and no one, and until Sandy said it, to me, this $1.3 million is very important, and ensuring we have someone that Dick can speak to and talk to get through this, my opinion, is very important, along with the budget side of it. And I believe selecting someone would be the best thing right now.
Well, in regards to the stuff that's on our list for deficiencies, there's a host of people that already are involved in understanding all of that, and people on this table are also knowledgeable at least in regards to the 30,000 foot view, and then we know we're going to lean on Icon for the rest, but the process is there. I kind of like what Alan says. I'm not sure that appointing somebody today with all that just to learn what they'd have to do to be effective, not to say they're not going to be effective, it's just it may be tougher. It may be tougher, and you know, you don't, the balance of the board of 3, 3, and 1, perhaps in the short run, because I'm the at-large person that really everybody voted for, but I'm also a golf member. Maybe that's how it comes through in the interim. I'm just thinking out loud, not saying that it's a way we should go. I'm just trying to understand, and I think what Alan says about understanding everything that we have to do in the next 2 weeks, and just appointing somebody will be a difficult task. Not saying it's impossible, but that's my position. And I also said that we'll never have these meetings more than 2 hours, but unfortunately, with the circumstances that came up, we're getting there, and there's other stuff to talk about. I'm not sure how we're going to resolve this right now. I'm not sure we can. You have a comment?
Krish, did you want to say something before we go to some of the
No,
questions?
go ahead. No,
Okay.
please.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Phillips.
You have already heard my stance on what I think the board should do. That's not going to change. I do want to echo what Tessa told everybody about from her experience with other communities and other boards. This is part of a board's responsibility to maintain cohesiveness in the community and on the board. And I think, like she said, it's more the norm for the board to take the responsibility to appoint somebody than it is to leave it vacant and wait. That's all I'm going to say.
Krish, do you have any comments before I move to the questions?
To be frank, I'm torn. Really, this is a very tough thing as a board to do. Especially, I'm more looking from a lot of the comments we heard. There are a lot of golf members who have been asking, how are our interests going to be protected on a 3 and 3 board? I really don't have an answer for that other than working together as Alan has suggested we've been. But I can't tell, to the members when they're asking, how are my interests going to be protected as a golf member when you're 3 and 3? I can't answer that. I'm just being very open how to do it. We have an opportunity, if we do it appropriately to take care of a lot of other things that in the part of the cycle that we have to go through in the elections. Unfortunately, TM left us with an unfortunate situation where only 2 people will change in this election cycle and 5 change at the next election cycle. That's a lot of understanding and knowledge walking out at one time, and when 5 people leave. So how do we balance all this? I don't have an answer. I'm with Steve. I think we need to take a few days to think through this and kind of come back. If we have a meeting next week, maybe this is one of the items to put back on the agenda and say, what are we going to do as an option? Instead of trying to do it right now and say, here is what it is, all of us have views, but I'm kind of struggling and say, which way should we go and what's best for us as a community to do? At the same time, protecting the interests of the golf members.
Agreed, and we've had several people contact us directly as your management team about how their interests will be reflected, particularly as part of the budget process. I would say, I think the good news is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Biller has seen the budget. He has had some input. The draft is, in the work. So the good news is you've had an opportunity to weigh in on that to your fellow board members, I'm assuming, on the golf members' side's behalf.
I will.
So that still can happen and has been happening before Mr. Biller leaves. So the good news is that voice is there. It just may not carry us through to the very end of that process. Before we proceed, we do have a few more comments and questions that we should address on this topic. Not necessarily maybe have the answers right now, but I think just to be heard. David Grock states, ask the first runner-up in golf if they want to finish out the term, the second runner-up if they want to serve, and that gives you a chance out of 2. Brad Klink states, can you only have someone serve until the election, as they would do in some states when a senator dies, but in doing so, the balance is retained in that scenario? Unfortunately, I think that what we've discussed is that statute doesn't allow that. They either appoint for the term or they allow the election. So there isn't an appoint for a shorter period of time, unfortunately, is not an option. Frank Kessman states, why not delay the budget process until the balanced board is in place? That also not an option. We need to keep moving forward on that process.
Well, you might as well state why we can't do that.
Yeah, well, you have to have the budget approved. I believe your documents require you to have a budget in place 30 days prior to the end of the fiscal year in accordance with statute and with your documents.
Well, not only that, we have to get the final budget approval to ICON to be able to make new
Correct.
new coupon books for the
books.
payments for
Yes,
next year.
exactly.
That
So,
takes 45 days.
Yeah, delaying the budget process, unfortunately, is not an option at this time either. Keith Manter states, I don't know if it's doable, but you could ask that the appointee agree to resign before the next election, then elect the replacement. That seems like a lot of work. And then Melanie Friedbach agreeing with the comment above and then bouncing back to an earlier topic. So
Okay. Well, I don't think we're going to make a decision tonight. I wish we would, but there is a point that Chris made that I was going to make, or at least suggest to our attorney, is that because of the election of the first 7, it turns out that 2 positions normal would have been open or been up for election this year, and then 5 positions would come available next year. Talk about continuity of the board. You'd have 5 going off at the same time. Everyone loves this job, but I'm not sure all 5 people want to do it again and like to get into retirement. So what I was going to suggest is to find out from our attorney if we could make the election of Dick's position instead of for the remainder of the term for actually another 2-year term, and then we'd have 4 people going off the board on 1 year and 3 people going off the board on another year. Helps with continuity. Not to say it's that we could legally do it, but that would have been a suggestion. But not sure we could do that at this point.
if your staggered terms are outlined in an amendment or in your declaration, that would require, now that TM is no longer here to make those changes with the majority approval, you would need 2/3 vote to make that change.
So the fact that we'd have to have a vote of a change of the declarations, which will be an arduous task, plus it takes time, so I'm sure that's not going to be available. So just so everyone knows, come next year there'll be 5 positions, and I'm sure there'll be a ton of people that would like to run, and this place will be done so smoothly it'll be a very easy job.
At a minimum, we could hope COVID's over.
So with that, unless there's a strong desire to make a decision tonight, I think we need to take a few days and kind of contemplate and check with some folks as to what we can do or what we should do, and then come up with a decision at the next board meeting, which will be next Tuesday. Is that acceptable? Absolutely. Okay.
All right.
With that.
So we will go ahead and table that. I apologize. I just put a cough drop in. The proposed code of conduct policy. So the board of directors has a couple codes of conduct in front of them for consideration. There are two different policies. One that is drafted for the responsibilities of board members and committee members that serve the community, and a separate code of conduct that would be intended for members, guests, tenants, and people of the like who reside in the community or are visiting people who reside in the community. As stated, when I sent this to you all via email, I would also recommend that before we do any sort of adoption process of either of these policies, I would like the attorney to put their eyes on it to make sure in terms of legality and enforcement and those types of things. My purpose for putting it in front of you this evening was to give you an opportunity to provide any feedback, any proposed additions, revisions before we send a draft to the attorney. So I'm not asking anything specifically of the board this evening, other than, especially within the interest of time, maybe just to take a look at this over the next couple of days. I'd like to get it to the attorney by the end of the week if we could, in hopes of having something back from him in time for our meeting next week, where we would then perhaps be in a better position to adopt one or both of these policies.
For expediency and speed at this point, supposing we just have a homework assignment, and if you have any changes that you'd like to make, give them to Tessa by Friday so we can give it to the attorney, get a review, and then we will have she'll be in a position to then make a motion to accept next board meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Steve. That wraps up our new business items. We can now move into the unfinished business. The first item being funding approval for improvement projects. And Krish, I believe that's for you.
Thank you, Tessa. This is a continuation of the item that we started at the last board meeting when I was talking to you about what options are available to generate more funds that are required so that we can have something called improvement project fund that we could utilize for making improvements to the community based on all the feedback we have been receiving. It's good to have this in place, and I shared with you what the proposal would be. Basically, where are the current funding sources very quickly? This is to enhance the stuff. One is reserve funds, and you all know the background. I've covered it. I'm not going to go through. The second is for improvement funds. These are really required to improve or add new facilities as identified in a strategic plan or based on member input, however they come from. So where do we do that? And to also cover, if we haven't identified an area in the reserves as a component, if it is not there, we have some source of funding for things that we could do if they're not in the reserves. Currently, they're not funded. So the request to the board is, how do we fund it? And that's the proposal coming through. And we have for the short-term construction defect funds, we talked about it. I'm not going to go through. I'm just going to focus on improvement funds and the suggestion on how do we fund it. I kind of told you last time the proposal is to commence funding the improvement funds from the $2,500 in working fund contribution that is made to the association by the purchaser during the sale of an existing home. So purchaser pays this as they're buying the new home as part of the closing, the $2,500 to the association. Until now, we have been using these funds as an operating income. So the suggestion is to do this because the declarations specifically allow the board to do this. They're written so that the intent was that from day one, these funds should have been put into really as for improvement categories, and it was not done. Okay, so here is a chance for us now to rectify the situation and have funds available. Based on the historical data of about 50 to 60 homes, existing homes sold per year, this projected contribution is somewhere between 125 to 150,000 a year. This is just a start. It won't satisfy all our needs, but a way to start kind of having funds for improvement projects. Okay? The working fund contributions are now, as I told you, as part of operating income. It has minimal impact in 2021 because our performance financially has been so good. So taking these funds and putting them away for improvements is pretty possible right now. And whatever impact in 2021 budget is, we're going to evaluate that and make sure that doesn't impact the 2021 budget process. So in both ways, I think we have enough space to be able to make this happen. This is, as I told you, this is just a start. When I mentioned this to the infrastructure group, the first thing they told me is, Krish, this my amount is not sufficient. How do we get more? I said, wait, let's start the process and we'll evaluate what additional options are available and we'll look at them as part of the process. The funds, once approved today, like the reserve funds, will be maintained in a separate account compared to where everything is. So we know that money is there, and then when we spend it, they would have to be capitalized, actually, in this case. So, okay? So that is it. So the request, the board approval sought, is authorize working fund contributions. I chosen a date of July 1st, and you can be open of this year. The reason is I would like to have some funds by the end of the year so that we can start some projects in next year. If you wait till next year, then we can't start the projects till at least the end of the first quarter. Financially, we are sound, so as I told you, it's not going to have any impact on 2020 in terms of that. Probably helps us in different ways as it comes to the end of the year. And the request is to remove those funds from the operating income and earmark it as improvement project fund and keep it in a separate account. That way we know exactly what that amount is. Some of you, if you ask the question, if you take for the whole year of this year, it'll be somewhere about 160,000 because we have 4 more months to go. Year to date is about close to 100,000 that we have collected in the working fund contributions already.
Given that we are flush with funds right now this year, it's a good year, I would suggest doing it retroactive to January 1st and increase the cushion while we have the ability to. If you wait to a year where things are break even, you won't have that ability. I think it's a great idea, and I think we should start it for the whole year.
I like this idea. I support it, but I think there's two points that need to be made here. Number one is if we do this and us or a future board finds themselves in operating fund problem out of here. A future board could always do that. It's not locked in here forever. And the second thing is I like this because it's for 2 reasons. Number one is we have a lot of approval projects that don't qualify as taking money from reserve. They don't qualify as ongoing expense. It's not a replacement. It's truly an improvement project. And the only way we have now is it's essentially assessment money, which is how we would do it. With this, though, it actually makes us sharpen our pencils a little bit more because we're competing. In other words, all these board members in here, we all have responsibility for different areas. I may want to do an improvement in pickleball, for example. Sandy wants to do one in golf, and Alan wants to do one in lifestyle. We, as a board, then need to determine, okay, where should the money be spent? Where should the effort be? So I like this for a lot of good reasons. And I do agree, why not just go back to January 1? Because we are good flush with funds this year. And if COVID did one thing this year, it increased our revenues in golf because there was no other game in town, and it decreased our expenses because we had the culinary center and the Bahama Bar and certain other things shut down for a while. So, be it as it may, I support it.
You always count on Bob to find the silver lining in things. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's a great idea. We're very fortunate for the financial management this year that put us in a position that could have this account for projects, and I really I would agree that it's something that we should probably do as if it sounds that we could do it as of January 1st. Any other discussions?
We did have one comment from Keith Manter that states, shouldn't improvements be discussed and funded as part of the annual budget process?
Yes, there's the strategic planning group has identified or have worked with all of the groups to identify projects that need to be funded, and there'll be a priority based on what we could afford to fund based in regards to assessment dollars that we have. This would be outside the assessment dollars, and then we could utilize these funds for the same projects and just have a different bucket for it. Chris, you want to expand
Yes,
on
please.
that?
So why don't I restate the board approval sought? Authorize working fund contributions starting January 1st of 2020 to be removed from the operating income in this year and earmarked for improvement project funds into the future, either this year or into the future.
Second.
Any discussion? If no further discussion, let's vote. All those in favor of the motion, signify aye. Motion passes. Tessa.
Thank you so much. All right, we are getting very close. It's 8:04, so we will make this brief if we can. You have before you a proposed compliance enforcement policy. I know the last time that we spoke about this briefly, there was some concern as to whether or not applying a standard process across the board would be effective or appropriate for, somebody has a sign in their front yard, do they need 10 days to take it out? No. Should it take them 10 days to get it out? No. Most of the time, will they just take care of it with a quick phone call or an email? Yes. But what I am looking for from the board is just a statement of approval to put in place a formal process for issuing letters that are related to compliance matters in the community. The most important thing with our compliance is that we remain consistent and efficient and compliant, of course. So the reality is, with 900 plus 1,200 homes in the community, the reality is if I even inspect a third of the community this week and issue those violations, by the time I get around to the other 2/3 and get back to that section again, that's not happening in less than 10 days anyways. So it would not be an efficient process for me to just chase whatever's open. Otherwise, now you're kind of selective, right? You're not capturing something new that might be popping up. The way that I've done inspections in the past is essentially that, kind of chunk down the community into sections and then inspect them on a rotation. Because when I go out, I don't just go out and say, I'm going to go and see, who all has signs today or who's all parking on the street today. When I go out and I drive down Treviso, I'm looking at every single home. What do I see? Is there a parking situation? Is there a landscape issue? Is there a sign? Is there a decorative item? Whatever it might be. So I am not, and I'll tell you why I do it that way. Because people really, really don't like getting letters, number one. They really like it even less if you send them a letter every week, because this week you went and looked for signs and next week you went and looked for parking, and the next week, because now all of a sudden they're getting a letter every single week. Whereas opposed to if I pull up in front of that house and I do kind of an overall view of like, okay, what do I see going on here? I would rather send them one letter that might identify 2 or 3 infractions as opposed to sending them 3 letters. One, it's a courtesy to the members of your association. 2, it's a cost savings. And 3, it's more efficient. So I am asking the board, and I don't have any preference in terms of how many letters you want to send or what the time frame between them is. I gave you a proposal of 3 letters, a first notice, a second notice, and then a final before it goes to the compliance committee. We can take a letter out of that process. We can shorten those, but you have to keep in mind, when I send that first notice and they have 10 days to correct it, it's 10 days from the date of the letter. And if any of you are familiar with the Lakewood Ranch Postal Service, you know the issues that can happen there, right? So it's going to be 10 days from the date of the letter, and we know they're not getting it on day 2, unfortunately. So the whole purpose of the timeline that I've outlined, with the first notice they get 10 days, a second notice they get 7, and the final they get 5 before they go to the compliance, that's essentially about 3 weeks from the start of the violation till they would come before the board, before I would come before the board and say, here are the list of violations I have today that have not been resolved. I'm asking for your approval to impose a fine.
Is that consistent with other Icon properties that you manage?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Do we have any discussion?
Tessa, I have a question. No, not discussing, a question. In other words, you mentioned the importance of being consistent, which I support entirely. And the examples you're giving are people that have the wrong sign in the yard or this kind of thing, which is pretty black and white. Would this enforcement method also apply to the code of conduct?
The code of conduct behavior, it can, but the documents give the board a little bit more flexibility just in how to handle those situations. So you wouldn't have to. And I think you would really want to deal with that that would really be a case-by-case basis.
Now, just so I understand, so the code of conduct, and there's one for the directors and group members, and then
Yep.
one for the residents at large. I notice the directors have more items than
yes.
we gotta. But nonetheless, so somebody does something in the neighborhood where their conduct is less than adequate. Are you saying that comes before the board, or does it go to a compliant?
Let's say we have a nuisance situation. We have
Somebody plays their music too loud.
somebody plays their music too loud
Something,
all the
yeah.
time, every weekend. It's kind of a recurring issue. That's going to follow this process. We're going to start with this process.
Okay.
I think some of the
that's
things that-
letter. All right. So they play their music too loud, and you will see where I'm going with this very quickly. They play their music too loud. The next door neighbor comes over and says, "Hey, hold it down," and so they get into a altercation. Would this policy be also would still be just a letter?
You
see where I'm going with this?
yes,
I
but
don't
you
know
have
how-
to sometimes. Those conduct situations are going to be unique in some ways, because there are certain times when things reach a level where the statute would define it as more of a civil matter and not an association matter. So that's where, we're going to have to look to statute in some of those instances, depending on the uniqueness of the situation and what's happening. Is it something that's just an accidental nuisance, or is it something that's an intentional?
You say we look into it, we being the board, or
No, we
Management.
Icon. 'Cause
Management, of course,
that's
yeah.
who we hired to do that work.
That's correct. That's correct. No, absolutely management. No, we can't give you guys all the fun.
I do want to say, having done this when TM was here, and had the compliance as well as when I lived over at Liver Club doing the same thing, this process is pretty much exactly what everybody does.
Okay.
The only difference is time frames. I mean, over at River Club, they did a 2-week between each one. And why, I don't know. It's just the way they did it. The other thing I will say is chances are 99.5% of the violations that go out will be cleared up before number 2 goes out. In the 3 years we did the compliance committee under Taylor Morrison, we had one person get to a fine.
It's good.
And part of the I won't get into it, but he came into the compliance committee and we fixed the problem. He better understood what he was doing and why someone else in the community was able to do it, but he wasn't. So it went well. But 99% of the time, we're not going to see them past the second letter.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? And so you're looking for.
I'm looking for
you want a motion for us to approve this standard?
Yes, to adopt this process, so
process.
that we are enforcing the restrictions uniformly across the board as they're stated in your documents.
Okay, so I'm sorry. There's another question first?
Oh, yes, excuse me. Bob Sales asks if instead of using the United States Postal Service, can you use email? And no, for according to statute, email is not a proper form of communication for a
Good
violation.
question, just not available. To make this official, we have to have a motion from a board member.
I make a motion that we accept Ms. Leal's proposal for the standard compliance enforcement process.
Have a second? Any discussion? If no discussion, let's vote. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next on the agenda,
Oh, this is your favorite one, the adjournment.
I will accept a motion to adjourn. I no
second
need to
it.
sit. We're done. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.